Frank sat alone in his small, dimly lit kitchen, the cold light of early morning casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. He cradled a cracked photo frame in his hands, the edges frayed like the memories it held, a younger version of himself, full of promise and fire, standing proudly next to his first car, eyes bright with dreams that had long since faded. "What if everything I believed about getting old was wrong?" he whispered to the empty room, a question that had gnawed at him for years but only now found a voice. At 68, Frank felt invisible, as if the world had slowly edged him out like an old piece of furniture gathering dust in the corner. His joints ached, his hair thinned, and the laughter that once filled his home had dwindled to silence. For years, he had accepted the idea that aging meant slowing down, stepping back, and eventually fading away. But today, something cracked inside him, a spark, fragile but real. That morning, scrolling aimlessly through his tablet, Frank stumbled across an interview with Elon Musk, the relentless entrepreneur who seemed to defy every rule about age, failure, and reinvention. Elon's words struck a chord: it's never too late to change the game. If you have a vision worth pursuing, you owe it to yourself to try, no matter how old you are. The message was simple but seismic, shaking loose decades of self-doubt and resignation. Frank's eyes welled up. Could it really be true? Could he still matter? Could he still create something meaningful? The kitchen felt less like a cage and more like the launching pad of a new life. As his fingers hovered over the keyboard, Frank hesitated, then typed a small but defiant message into a new blog: "I'm starting over at 68. This is my journey back from invisible." A quiet thrill surged through him, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He posted and waited, unsure if anyone would read, if anyone would care. Outside, the neighborhood stirred awake, unaware of the tiny revolution beginning in a weathered kitchen. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He typed at the bottom, feeling an unexpected connection to strangers he had yet to meet. It was a lifeline, a call to others who might also feel stuck, forgotten, or too old to change. The hours passed. The silence stretched. Then the first notification pinged. Someone from Ohio wrote, "You're not alone. My 70-year-old mother just started her own pottery class. Keep going." Another from Texas, "I've been waiting for someone to say this out loud. Thank you." Frank smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. Elon Musk was not just a tech billionaire, he was a symbol of radical thinking, of rebellion against limitations, and maybe, just maybe, Frank could be that too. The day unfolded in a blur of emails, comments, and messages of encouragement. The kitchen, once cold and lonely, now felt charged with possibility. Frank leaned back in his chair, heart pounding, breath catching. "It's not too late," he said quietly, as if convincing himself as much as anyone else. The world hadn't forgotten him. He hadn't forgotten himself. And in that moment, the story of Frank's transformation began, one small step at a time, fueled by the courage to believe in a new kind of aging. This was not the end. It was the moment it all changed. The life before the shift: Frank had once been a man full of ambition and energy, a bright-eyed engineer with a knack for invention and a dream of making a mark on the world. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, he'd spent countless afternoons in his father's garage, learning how to take things apart and put them back together better than before. That garage had been his sanctuary, the birthplace of ideas and the place where he first believed he could build something meaningful. But somewhere along the way, life had a way of pulling him off course. After marrying his high school sweetheart, Susan, and starting a family, Frank's dreams began to feel like distant echoes. The demands of work, bills, and raising 2 children slowly consumed his time and energy. The brilliant inventions he once imagined stayed locked away in notebooks, buried beneath responsibilities and exhaustion. He had watched his youth slip away quietly, a slow fading of color in the vibrant painting of his life. His marriage, once full of laughter and hope, had frayed at the edges, worn thin by unspoken disappointments and missed chances. Susan had passed away 5 years ago, a sudden illness that left Frank adrift and alone. The house they shared, filled with memories, now felt like a museum of what could have been. His children had moved far away, his daughter Linda to California, his son David to New York, and the calls that once came regularly dwindled to polite check-ins, tinged with distance and discomfort. Frank missed them desperately but didn't know how to bridge the growing gaps. Regret was a constant companion. He thought about the projects he never finished, the inventions he never pursued, and the chances he never took. He remembered one key moment vividly, standing in that old garage one autumn afternoon, a blueprint clutched in his hand, ready to build a prototype that could change how people used energy. But fear whispered that it was too risky, that he had to focus on providing for his family, that he was too old to start something new. So he folded the blueprint away, and the garage grew quiet and dusty, much like his heart. Now, years later, Frank felt the weight of those choices pressing down on him like the heavy Ohio sky before a storm. His body was slower, the aches of arthritis reminding him every day that time was not on his side. The loneliness cut deep, and the world seemed to move faster than he could follow. He was haunted by a feeling of invisibility, like a ghost wandering through a life that no longer recognized him. At times, he caught himself shrinking away from the mirror, avoiding the reflection of a man who seemed tired, worn, and forgotten. Yet beneath that weariness, a small ember of longing still burned, a desperate wish to reclaim some piece of the man he once was, to find purpose beyond survival. The house was cluttered with reminders of a life paused, old tools, faded photographs, dusty journals filled with sketches and half-formed ideas. Each item was a silent witness to dreams deferred. Frank spent hours staring out the window at the quiet street, watching neighbors rush past, children playing, life happening just beyond his reach. The world had moved on, leaving him behind. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the house was still and the memories loudest, Frank would pull out that dusty notebook from the back of the closet. He'd trace the lines of blueprints and sketches, feeling a pang of hope mixed with sadness. Those were the stories of a younger man, full of promise and fire, a man who believed in second chances. Despite it all, Frank never fully gave up on the idea that maybe, somehow, he could start again. He just didn't know how. The passing years had made him cautious, afraid of failure and rejection. Who would listen to an old man with forgotten dreams, he often wondered. But deep inside, something refused to let go. He still had questions. Still had hope. It was that fragile hope that flickered in the early morning light when he found Elon Musk's interview, a voice from a different world that somehow spoke directly to him. Elon, a man decades younger but unbound by the usual rules of aging or fear, challenged everything Frank believed about growing old. Elon's relentless pursuit of innovation, even after setbacks and failures, was a beacon shining through Frank's self-imposed darkness. That day, the memories of the garage, the missed chances, and the loneliness didn't overwhelm him as much. Instead, they became fuel. The ember grew brighter. Frank realized his story wasn't over. It had been paused, waiting for the right moment to ignite again. The life before the shift was one of quiet surrender, a man trapped between regret and longing, caught in the web of too late and too old. But beneath the surface, the core of who he was remained intact, a creator, a dreamer, a fighter. And for the first time in years, Frank began to believe he might still have something to offer the world. As he sat in that kitchen, clutching the cracked photo of his younger self, the weight of lost time pressed on him, but so did the stirring of new possibilities. The shadows of the past were long, but they no longer cast him down entirely. The journey back to life, to purpose, to meaning, was beginning. The moment it all changed wasn't a sudden explosion but a quiet awakening. A chance to rewrite the story that aging had tried to write for him. And with that, Frank took a deep breath and prepared to step into the unknown. The inner war Frank's mind became a battleground where hope and doubt clashed in relentless waves. Every morning, he woke up wrestling the same questions that haunted his thoughts. Is it too late for me? Does anyone even care? What's the point of trying now? The voice of his daughter, Linda, echoed in his head. She had called last week, her tone gentle but firm. Dad, you need to slow down. You're not a young man anymore. We worry about your health. It was not the first time she urged caution, and Frank understood her worry, but it felt like a cage, a reminder of limits he didn't want to accept. The doctor's words from his last checkup rang loud too. Take it easy, Frank. Your heart isn't as strong as it used to be. Don't push yourself. Those warnings were meant to protect, but to Frank, they felt like nails sealing shut a coffin of his dreams. Society's quiet dismissal was an invisible weight pressing down on him. He could feel it in the way neighbors avoided deep conversations, how old friends stopped inviting him out, as if aging meant fading away quietly and without fuss. The world's glance seemed to say, "You're done." But inside, something stubborn refused to give up. One evening, feeling crushed by the invisible walls closing in, Frank turned on the radio and stumbled upon a podcast featuring Elon Musk. Elon's voice cut through the haze of Frank's despair, sharp and electrifying. Failure is just a stepping stone. You learn, you adapt, and you keep going. If you're not failing, you're not innovating. The words hit Frank like a jolt of electricity. Could a man like Elon really understand the fears of someone who had spent decades feeling irrelevant? Elon wasn't just talking about tech or rockets, he was talking about life itself, fearlessness in the face of doubt, resilience when the world says no, and the refusal to accept too late as a final answer. That night, Frank lay awake, Elon's voice echoing in his mind, challenging every limiting belief he had held on to for years. He realized that the biggest battle wasn't outside but inside, between the fear of failure and the desperate yearning to try. Frank's neighbors saw him as an old man who should be settling into quiet retirement, but Frank was beginning to rebel. He was starting to see that the only thing truly stopping him was his own acceptance of those limitations. But the war wasn't easy. Every small step forward was met with waves of doubt. He caught himself thinking, what if I fail again? What if I embarrass myself? What if I lose what little respect I have left? Each thought threatened to pull him back into the shadows. At the same time, his family's skepticism weighed heavily. His son David had always been practical, the kind of man who believed in security over risk. David had once told Frank, "Dad, you've done enough. Let's focus on your comfort now." It stung more than Frank admitted. Did they really think he was done? Frank longed for a chance to show them he was still capable, still vibrant beneath the surface. The inner conflict grew fierce when Frank found himself avoiding calls and invitations, not out of lack of love, but because he feared judgment. Maybe I'm just embarrassing myself, he thought. The silence in his home became louder, each empty chair a reminder of what aging felt like, a slow disappearance. Yet Elon Musk's presence was a beacon in the storm. He watched videos of Elon pushing rockets to the brink, starting companies again and again, refusing to accept limits. Elon's defiance of the status quo was a mirror to Frank's own suppressed rebellion. He found himself repeating Elon's words like a mantra, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Slowly, Frank began to push against his fears. He started by setting small goals, a 15-minute walk each morning, organizing his garage bench, writing a journal entry about his dreams. Each act was a tiny victory against the voice inside that told him to give up. Yet the fear of failure lurked, ready to pounce. One afternoon, while tinkering with an old device in the garage, his hands trembled with anxiety. What if this was all pointless? What if the world didn't care? He thought of Elon's own failures, the rocket crashes, the public doubts, the harsh criticism, but also Elon's relentless rise after every fall. Frank realized that failure wasn't the enemy. It was the price of trying. As the weeks passed, Frank noticed a subtle change. The battle inside wasn't won, but he was no longer a passive victim. He was a fighter, bruised but still standing. Elon's mindset was no longer just words, it was becoming a part of him. One evening, Frank received an unexpected message on his blog. A woman named Carol, a senior from Arizona, wrote, "I've felt the same way. I thought my best days were behind me. But your story is a spark. Thank you for reminding me it's never too late." The message stirred something deeper in Frank. He was not alone in this struggle. Across the country, others wrestled with the same fears and doubts. The invisible war inside him was a shared battle. Frank began to see himself not as a relic but as a symbol of resilience, someone who could defy the narrative of decline. The journey was just beginning. Elon Musk's example was a challenge and a promise, that age was not a sentence but a stage, and the greatest innovations often come when the world least expects them. Frank's inner war was fierce, but within it lay the seed of transformation. And as he faced his fears head-on, he knew that the next chapter of his life would demand everything he had, and then some. The one thing they changed. Frank woke up one morning feeling a restless energy simmering beneath the usual heaviness. The nights had grown quieter, and the doubts that used to crash over him like tidal waves had softened to a persistent hum. Elon Musk's voice kept playing in his mind, a spark lighting a path through the fog of uncertainty. "If you're not failing, you're not innovating." Those words had settled deep, nudging Frank toward action. He wasn't going to overhaul his life overnight, that was unrealistic. But he knew he needed to make one bold choice, one small act of rebellion against the creeping despair that had settled in. That morning, he laced up his worn sneakers and stepped outside, the crisp air biting at his skin but invigorating in its honesty. The street was quiet except for the distant chatter of neighbors and the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Frank started walking. Not just around the block, but down the sidewalks he hadn't touched in years, his steps slow but deliberate. Each footfall was a promise to himself, a small claim on a future he still wanted to live. Walking became more than exercise, it was a ritual of reclaiming his body, his mind, and his purpose. Day by day, those walks grew longer. He found himself noticing details he'd ignored for decades, the bright petals of a flower blooming stubbornly through cracked pavement, the smile of a passerby, the gentle hum of life all around. On one walk, he stopped outside a community center, a flyer taped to the window caught his eye, "Creative Workshop for Seniors, Build, Create, Connect." His heart quickened. The words spoke to the inventor in him, the man who had once dreamed of changing the world with his ideas. That afternoon, with shaky hands but steady resolve, Frank walked into the community center and signed up. It was a small step, but monumental in its defiance. The workshop was a mix of retirees with diverse backgrounds and stories. Some were painters, some musicians, others like Frank, longing to rekindle a spark of creativity. As he sat at the workbench, the smell of wood shavings and paint filled the air, bringing back echoes of that old garage where his dreams were born. For the first time in years, Frank felt alive in a way that wasn't tied to routine or obligation. Encouraged by the instructor, he began sketching ideas for a small energy-efficient device he'd dreamed about decades ago but never built. The designs were rough, but the excitement was real. With every line drawn, Frank felt layers of doubt peel away. He shared his story with the group, about the years lost to fear and regret, about Elon Musk's words that pushed him to try again. The other participants nodded in understanding, their eyes reflecting their own battles with age and purpose. That night, Frank returned home with a sketchbook full of plans and a heart full of determination. He spent hours in the garage, dusting off tools and assembling parts he hadn't touched in years. The work was slow and frustrating, but it was his own, an act of creation that defied the narrative of fading away. Frank's children noticed the change. Linda called more often, curious and cautious, while David sent a brief text, "Keep at it, Dad." It wasn't much, but it was a sign. The inner walls he'd built were starting to crack. On one of his walks, Frank stopped at a park bench and pulled out his phone. He began writing a blog post titled, "Starting Over at 68, Why It's Never Too Late." The words poured out, raw, honest, filled with the pain of lost years and the hope of new beginnings. He shared his fears, his small victories, and Elon Musk's relentless refusal to accept limits. The post went live, and within hours, comments started to trickle in. Readers shared their own stories, their own dreams deferred. Some wrote about the loneliness of aging, others about the joy of rediscovery. Frank realized that his one small change, simply choosing to walk, to create, to speak out, was sparking a connection far beyond what he imagined. Each step forward was a declaration: he mattered. He could still contribute. He could still inspire. The community center workshop became a weekly ritual. Frank found himself surrounded by people who saw past the wrinkles and gray hair to the potential still pulsing beneath. They exchanged ideas, gave feedback, and celebrated each other's progress. In those moments, Frank was no longer invisible. He was a mentor, a learner, a creator. The physical changes followed too. His walk strengthened his body, the aches softened, and his sleep improved. But the transformation was deeper than physical. His spirit, once dulled by years of isolation, began to shine. One evening, as he worked on his prototype, the power flickered and went out. Instead of frustration, Frank smiled. The darkness was temporary, just like the doubts that had once held him captive. He plugged in his old lantern, the warm glow filling the garage like a symbol of resilience. That night, he sent a message to Elon Musk on social media, a simple note of thanks. It wasn't for fame or recognition, but a gesture of gratitude to the man whose words had reignited a fire inside him. To Frank's surprise, Elon's team replied with encouragement. It was a small digital nod, but it meant the world. Frank realized then that the one thing he had changed wasn't just a habit or a hobby. It was his mindset. He had chosen to believe in possibility again, to push past fear, to embrace the discomfort of growth. It was a revolution quietly unfolding in a small Ohio garage, fueled by courage and connection. As weeks turned to months, Frank's blog gained followers. Stories poured in from seniors across the country, each inspired by his journey. Some started their own projects, others reconnected with estranged family, and many found new joy in simply refusing to give up. Frank's life was no longer defined by loss but by the limitless potential of what still could be. The moment he chose to change one thing, the decision to walk, create, and share, became the turning point in a story that was far from over. And in that choice, Frank discovered a truth Elon Musk had lived by: the power to transform is always within reach, no matter your age. Breaking through, Frank never expected the ripple effect of his small choices to turn into a wave. It started with his blog post, a simple message of hope and defiance titled, "Starting Over at 68, Why It's Never Too Late." At first, the comments trickled in slowly: encouragement from strangers, stories of their own struggles, a few shares among friends. But soon, something shifted. One afternoon, Frank received an email from a local news station. "We'd love to feature your story," it said. His heart raced, a mixture of excitement and anxiety flooding his chest. The idea of stepping into the spotlight was terrifying, but it was also a chance to prove something, to himself, to his children, to the world. The interview day arrived with a nervous energy. The crew arrived at his modest Ohio home, their cameras and microphones turning his quiet world into a stage. Frank stood in the garage, the familiar scent of sawdust and metal grounding him. As the cameras rolled, he told his story. The regrets, the loneliness, the moment Elon Musk's words sparked a fire inside him. He spoke honestly about fear and failure, about the courage it took to take that first step. Watching the footage later, Frank saw a man transformed, not just in body but in spirit. The video went viral. Overnight, thousands saw Frank's journey. Messages flooded his inbox from seniors across America, many feeling unseen and unheard, but inspired by his courage. "You gave me hope," wrote Mary from Texas. "I started painting again after 30 years, said John from Florida. The response overwhelmed Frank. It was more than he could have imagined. His story was no longer just his, it was a beacon for others navigating the shadows of aging and doubt. Among the messages was one that shook him deeply. It was from Linda, his daughter, who hadn't spoken in months. "Dad," she wrote, "I'm proud of you. I see you again." Tears blurred his vision. After years of distance, the walls between them were crumbling. Frank reached out and they arranged a visit, a chance to rebuild bridges thought lost. The reunion was tender, full of unspoken apologies and new promises. Linda listened as Frank shared his journey, and for the first time, she saw the fire that had never truly gone out. It wasn't just about the inventions or the blog, it was about reclaiming life itself. Around the same time, Frank completed his prototype, the device he'd dreamed of building in his youth, now realized with the hands and heart of an older man. Holding it felt like holding a piece of himself, a symbol of resilience and renewal. He shared the prototype with the workshop community, their applause echoing the triumph in his soul. Yet, the victory was not without vulnerability. Frank often found himself awake late at night, the weight of fear and uncertainty creeping in. Would this breakthrough last? Would the world still embrace him tomorrow? Those moments reminded him that transformation was not a destination but a journey, one filled with ups and downs. But now, the hope was stronger than the fear. Frank had broken through the silence and isolation, stepping into a new chapter where he mattered, not despite his age, but because of the wisdom and strength it brought. His story was living proof that the labels of too old or finished were lies told by a society afraid to see the untapped potential of its seniors. Frank's legacy was no longer just a memory of what might have been but a living, breathing testament to what could be. The breakthrough was not just his, it belonged to everyone who dared to believe they could start again. And as Frank looked out the window one quiet evening, the stars shimmering above like distant dreams, he smiled, knowing that the fire Elon Musk had ignited inside him would burn long into the night, and beyond. The new legacy. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as Frank sat at his kitchen table, a warm cup of coffee cradled in his hands. The quiet was different now, filled not with loneliness or fear, but with possibility. He stared out the window at the familiar street, once dull and lifeless, now a stage for his new beginning. The journey from doubt to determination had been long and winding, but here he was, standing not at the end, but at a threshold. He remembered the days when aging felt like a slow fade into invisibility, when his body betrayed him and his dreams seemed like distant echoes. Those memories were no longer chains but reminders of how far he had come. Frank's thoughts drifted to Elon Musk, whose words had been the spark that set this transformation in motion. Elon, a man unafraid to challenge limits, to fail publicly and rise again, had been more than a symbol. He was a guide, a mirror reflecting the courage Frank needed to claim. Frank realized that the real lesson was not about technology or innovation alone, but about refusing to accept the story society wrote for you. Aging was not a sentence, it was a chapter, filled with its own challenges and triumphs. Frank had found his voice in that chapter, and with it, a new legacy to build. He thought about the people who had reached out through his blog, the seniors who had found a spark in his story and dared to dream again. Their words were a chorus of hope, a testament to the quiet power of shared struggle and resilience. Frank understood now that legacy was not measured in wealth or fame, but in impact, the lives touched, the hearts lifted, the courage inspired. He picked up his journal and began to write, not just about his inventions or achievements, but about the lessons learned from this journey. "I was never too old," he wrote. "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." The words felt like a key turning in a lock, opening a door to new possibilities. Frank's relationship with his family blossomed. Linda and David visited more often, their skepticism replaced with admiration and support. The bridge that had once felt impossible to cross was now solid ground. Together, they dreamed of projects and adventures that no longer seemed out of reach. Frank's health improved with the steady routine of walking and creating. The aches and pains remained, reminders of time past, but they no longer defined him. He was stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. The community center became a hub of activity, a place where seniors gathered not just to pass time, but to innovate and inspire. Frank took on a mentorship role, encouraging others to break through their fears and embrace their potential. Each success story from the group was a thread woven into the fabric of their shared legacy. One crisp autumn afternoon, Frank stood before a crowd at the community center's annual showcase, the prototype device proudly displayed beside him. He spoke with a steady voice, sharing not just the story of his invention, but the journey of transformation that led him here. The audience, a sea of familiar faces, listened intently, some with tears, others with smiles of recognition. Frank's words were simple but powerful: it's never too late to start. The world still needs our ideas, our passion, our wisdom. We are not done. We are just beginning. After the applause faded, Frank stepped outside into the cool air, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. He felt a deep peace settle over him. The fear and loneliness of years past had given way to connection and purpose. The new legacy he was building was one of hope, resilience, and relentless possibility. As night fell, Frank returned home and sat by his window, the city lights twinkling like stars brought closer. He thought about the future, not as something to fear, but as a canvas waiting for bold strokes. The transformation he'd undergone was a testament to what could happen when we reject the lies about aging and embrace the truth of our enduring strength. Frank's story was no longer just his own. It belonged to every senior who had ever felt forgotten, every person who feared change was beyond their reach. Through his journey, Frank had become a beacon, a living proof that age is not a limit but a launching point. He whispered to the night, "This is just the beginning." And with that, the chapter closed not on an ending, but on a promise that no matter the years behind, the greatest stories are still ahead. Opening new doors, Frank's newfound momentum began to ripple beyond his own world. The garage where he once tinkered alone became a hub of activity and ideas. His invention, once a solitary project born from a desire to prove he still mattered, had blossomed into a community effort. Neighbors and workshop friends gathered regularly, eager to contribute skills, share knowledge, and dream bigger. The energy was contagious, like a long-dormant engine finally roaring to life. Frank's days filled with collaboration, each meeting a mix of laughter, frustration, and triumph. The workshop was a place where age was no barrier, but an asset, wisdom guiding youthful enthusiasm, experience grounding bold ideas. Word spread, and soon a local nonprofit reached out, offering resources and support to help turn Frank's prototype into something more tangible. They saw the potential, not just in the device, but in what Frank represented, the refusal to fade quietly, the power of reinvention at any age. Frank accepted their offer, humbled but energized. The process of development was grueling. Challenges mounted, technical setbacks, funding worries, the constant push against his own physical limits. Yet each obstacle was met with the spirit Elon Musk had inspired in him, relentless perseverance. Frank remembered Elon's words from a recent interview: "When you want to innovate, you have to be willing to fail and fail often. The important part is to keep moving forward." Those words became a mantra, echoing through the late nights in the garage and the long conversations with the nonprofit team. With their help, Frank secured a small grant to fund materials and prototype refinement. The local paper featured his story again, this time focusing on the community collaboration and the breakthrough potential of the invention. The article caught the attention of a university engineering department. Professors and students reached out, offering expertise and eager hands to assist. Suddenly, what had been a solitary dream was becoming a shared mission. Frank felt a surge of pride but also responsibility. He was no longer just a man chasing his own redemption, he was a catalyst for a movement, proof that innovation and impact didn't retire with age. His family grew closer, too. Linda volunteered at the community center, helping organize events, while David offered practical advice on marketing and outreach. Their initial skepticism gave way to enthusiasm, and the old walls between them transformed into bridges built on mutual respect and hope. One afternoon, during a meeting with the university team, Frank listened as students presented new ideas for improving the device. Their energy was inspiring, their creativity boundless. He marveled at how different generations could come together, united by a shared purpose. The collaboration breathed new life into his project and, more importantly, into Frank himself. Outside the workshop, Frank's walks took on a new rhythm. They were no longer just physical exercise but moments of reflection and gratitude. He noticed the changing seasons with renewed appreciation, the crispness of autumn air, the soft bloom of spring flowers, the golden light of summer evenings. Each step was a celebration of life's ongoing beauty. One evening, Frank received an invitation to speak at a regional conference focused on innovation and aging. The opportunity was both thrilling and daunting. Public speaking was never his strength, but the chance to share his story and inspire others was too important to pass up. On the day of the conference, Frank stood backstage, heart pounding. The room was filled with experts, entrepreneurs, and seniors like himself. When his turn came, he stepped onto the stage and took a deep breath. He spoke with honesty and passion about the struggles of aging, the lies society tells about too late and finished, and the power of choice to rewrite the narrative. He shared the journey sparked by Elon Musk's fearless mindset, the small steps that grew into a movement, and the new doors that opened when he dared to believe again. The audience responded with warmth and applause, many moved to tears. Frank felt the weight of years lift, replaced by a profound sense of connection and purpose. After the talk, people approached him, eager to share their own stories and ideas. Frank realized then that his legacy was expanding, not just through inventions, but through the lives he touched and the conversations he ignited. That night, back at home, Frank sat by his window and reflected on the journey so far. The man who once felt invisible was now a beacon of hope and transformation. The future was no longer a question mark but a canvas waiting for new stories to be written. Elon Musk's words had been the spark, but Frank's courage had fanned it into a flame. As he closed his eyes, a quiet resolve settled within him. He would continue opening doors, not just for himself, but for all those who felt forgotten, proving every day that age is not an ending, but a new beginning. The unexpected ally Frank's project was gaining momentum, but with it came new challenges, skepticism, doubts, and the weight of expectations. He knew the path of reinvention was never smooth, but he hadn't expected resistance from those closest to him. One afternoon, after a workshop session, Linda pulled him aside. Her brow was furrowed, eyes filled with concern. "Dad, I know you're excited, but sometimes I worry you're pushing too hard." The doctor said to slow down. "What if you burn out?" Frank looked into her eyes, recognizing the love and fear behind her words. He understood why she worried. Years of watching him struggle with health issues had made caution a natural response. But slowing down wasn't an option anymore. "Not now." "Linda, I appreciate that," he said gently. "But this is what keeps me going. When I'm working on this, I'm not just surviving, I'm living." She sighed but nodded, sensing the resolve in his voice. The tension lingered, a reminder that transformation often meets resistance, even from those who love us most. Then, something unexpected happened. During a community event, Frank met Marjorie, a retired engineer in her 70s with a sharp mind and an infectious energy. Marjorie had spent decades designing machinery for aerospace companies, a career cut short by corporate downsizing and health issues. She had retreated into quiet retirement, feeling sidelined and forgotten. But when she heard about Frank's project, something stirred. They connected instantly, a spark of mutual recognition lighting the room. Here was someone who understood not just the technical challenges but the emotional journey of reclaiming purpose in later life. Marjorie offered her expertise, volunteering to help refine the prototype and navigate manufacturing hurdles. Her insights were invaluable, and her presence a balm for Frank's occasional doubts. Together, they tackled obstacles with a blend of experience and fresh perspective. Marjorie's partnership was more than practical, it was deeply inspiring. Frank found in her a kindred spirit, proof that age was not a barrier but a shared chapter of resilience and reinvention. Their collaboration blossomed, each challenge met with laughter, determination, and respect. With Marjorie's help, the project accelerated. They refined designs, tested components, and explored potential markets. The nonprofit expanded support, attracted by the credibility her involvement brought. Meanwhile, Frank's health improved with the steady rhythm of work and friendship. The skeptical voices faded into the background, replaced by a chorus of encouragement. One evening, as they reviewed the latest test results, Marjorie turned to Frank and said, "You know, this isn't just about a device. It's about proving something bigger, that we still have so much to offer." Frank smiled, feeling the truth in her words. Their shared mission was no longer just personal, it was a beacon for others who had been told their time was past. News of their partnership reached local media again. This time, the story highlighted not just innovation but the power of collaboration across generations and experiences. Frank and Marjorie were invited to speak at schools and senior centers, sharing their journey and encouraging others to embrace change fearlessly. The impact was profound. Seniors who had felt invisible began to see themselves as active contributors, while younger generations gained new respect and understanding for the wisdom that comes with age. Amid this whirlwind, Frank received a surprising call from an old friend, Tom, who he hadn't spoken to in years. Tom was a retired businessman, known for his blunt honesty and pragmatic approach to life. Their past had been rocky, lost years filled with misunderstandings and missed opportunities. But Tom's voice on the phone was warm, tinged with regret. "Frank, I've been following what you're doing. I was wrong to doubt you. If there's a way I can help, I want to be part of it." The call was a turning point. Forgiveness and renewed friendship brought another layer of strength to Frank's journey. Together, they brainstormed ideas for fundraising and outreach, blending Frank's vision with Tom's business savvy. With Marjorie's technical skills and Tom's support, the project was transforming from a personal mission into a community movement. The challenges persisted, of course, setbacks with suppliers, moments of exhaustion, and the ever-present question of whether the device would truly make a difference. But now, Frank was not alone. He had allies, unexpected, powerful, and deeply meaningful. Each obstacle faced with them was lighter, each victory sweeter. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood park with Marjorie and Tom, Frank felt a surge of gratitude. The journey that had once seemed lonely and uncertain was now rich with connection, purpose, and hope. He realized that the true breakthrough wasn't just the invention itself, but the community and legacy they were building together. That night, as Frank sat in his favorite chair, he reflected on how far he had come, from feeling invisible and defeated to becoming a leader, mentor, and innovator. Elon Musk's voice echoed in his mind once more, "Don't listen to the noise. Focus on the mission." Frank had taken that advice to heart. With new allies by his side and a vision fueled by passion, he was ready to face whatever came next. The unexpected friendships, the renewed family ties, the community that rallied around him, these were the true treasures of his transformation. And in that truth, Frank found not just hope, but an unshakable sense of purpose. He whispered to the night, "We're just getting started." Facing the critics, the glow of success can be blinding, but it also casts shadows, and for Frank, those shadows took the form of critics who questioned everything he stood for. After months of steady progress, invitations to speak, and growing public attention, skepticism began to seep in. Some questioned the feasibility of his invention. Others doubted the wisdom of chasing innovation at his age. Social media comments ranged from dismissive to downright cruel. Why bother? At 70, you should be enjoying retirement, not chasing pipe dreams, one post read. Another sneered, old men should know when to quit. The sting of those words cut deep. Despite the community support and personal victories, the harsh reality was clear. Society still clung to old narratives about aging, stories that told seniors to fade quietly into the background. Frank felt the familiar tug of doubt creep in, whispering that maybe they were right. Maybe he was chasing something impossible. But then he remembered Elon Musk's resilience in the face of relentless criticism, how failure was not just accepted but expected on the path to greatness. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor, Elon had once said. Frank clung to that truth. He decided to confront the critics head-on. He wrote a new blog post titled, "Why Age Should Never Define Our Potential," addressing the harsh voices with honesty and courage. He shared not just his achievements but his fears and failures, inviting readers into the messy reality of transformation. The response was powerful. Many seniors wrote back, thanking him for speaking the truth. Others shared their own stories of feeling sidelined and silenced. Frank realized that the critics, while loud, were a minority compared to the countless others hungry for change and recognition. Encouraged, Frank scheduled a live Q&A session on social media. A bold move to engage directly with supporters and skeptics alike. The event drew hundreds of viewers. Questions ranged from technical details about the invention to deeply personal inquiries about motivation and purpose. Frank answered with humility and strength, refusing to shy away from difficult topics. One moment stood out. A young man asked, "Don't you worry that society just won't accept change from someone your age?" Frank smiled, the question striking at the heart of the struggle. "Every day," he admitted. "But I also know that if we wait for permission to matter, we'll never take that first step. Change starts with us, no matter our age." The honesty resonated. After the session, Frank received a wave of support that far outweighed the criticism. His message was clear: aging was not a barrier but a platform. Meanwhile, the invention itself faced scrutiny from industry experts and potential investors. Some dismissed it as impractical, others questioned the market demand. The pressure mounted. Frank leaned on Marjorie and Tom, whose expertise helped navigate the technical and business challenges. They crafted responses to concerns, refined prototypes, and adapted strategies. The process was exhausting but necessary. One particularly harsh review from a prominent technology magazine called the project a sentimental endeavor lacking innovation. Frank read the article late one night, the words stinging like a slap. Yet instead of despair, he felt a surge of determination. If anything, the criticism fueled his resolve. He reached out to the editor with an invitation: "Come see the project firsthand, meet the team, understand the vision." The editor agreed, intrigued. The visit was a turning point. Witnessing the passion, community involvement, and real-world potential changed the editor's perspective. A follow-up article painted a more balanced and hopeful picture, highlighting the innovation and the broader social impact. Frank learned a vital lesson: critics may try to dim the light, but authenticity and perseverance could cut through the noise. He also understood that vulnerability was a strength, not weakness. Sharing doubts, fears, and failures made his story relatable and human, breaking down barriers between himself and his audience. The process of facing criticism strengthened Frank in unexpected ways. It forged deeper connections with supporters and sharpened the vision for the future. The journey was no longer just about proving skeptics wrong, it was about building a movement that redefined aging and possibility. As the months passed, Frank continued to speak out against ageism and the false narratives that trap so many seniors in silence and invisibility. He collaborated with advocacy groups, participated in panels, and used every platform to amplify the message that the best chapters of life are often unwritten. His story, once a quiet spark, had become a wildfire of inspiration. Late one evening, after a long day of meetings, Frank sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by prototypes and notes. He thought about the critics, the supporters, the journey itself. A deep sense of peace settled over him. He had faced the storm and emerged stronger, not because he silenced the voices against him, but because he refused to be defined by them. Elon Musk's voice echoed once more in his mind: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. Frank smiled. He was far from giving up. The fire inside him burned brighter than ever. The critics could talk, but the legacy he was building, one of courage, innovation, and hope, would speak louder. And that was a future worth fighting for. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Rekindling relationships. Frank's journey of transformation wasn't just about inventions and public speeches, it was also deeply personal. The walls he had built around himself over decades of hurt and regret were slowly starting to crumble, revealing spaces where healing could take root. One evening, after a long day of work at the community center, Frank found himself thinking about Sarah, his estranged daughter. Their last conversation, years ago, had ended in frustration and silence. The gap between them felt insurmountable, filled with misunderstandings and missed chances. Yet as Frank's own life shifted, so did his heart. He realized that the fear of rejection was a burden heavier than the possibility of reconnecting. Inspired by Elon Musk's willingness to face hard truths and reach out despite setbacks, Frank decided it was time to try again. He drafted a letter, simple, honest, without expectations. He shared a little about his project, his new purpose, and most importantly, his hope to rebuild their relationship. The act of writing felt like crossing a bridge he'd been avoiding for too long. Days passed with no response, stirring old fears that perhaps the door had closed forever. Then, unexpectedly, Sarah replied. Her words were cautious but open, expressing surprise, curiosity, and a willingness to talk. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe, a neutral ground where years of silence could start to unravel. The first meeting was tentative, filled with awkward pauses and careful conversation. Frank listened more than he spoke, learning about Sarah's life, her struggles, triumphs, and the wounds she carried. She, in turn, listened as Frank shared his own journey, the spark that had reignited his will to live fully. There were tears and laughter, moments of pain and understanding. Neither promised that the past could be erased, but both embraced the possibility of a new chapter. Over the weeks that followed, their meetings became more frequent and fluid. Old resentments softened, replaced by shared stories and renewed connection. Sarah even volunteered to help with Frank's community events, bringing her energy and ideas to the project. Watching her engage with the seniors and students alike, Frank felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. Frank's reconciliation with Sarah opened a broader reflection on the relationships he had neglected or lost over the years. He reached out to old friends, some estranged family members, and even neighbors he hadn't spoken to in ages. The responses varied, some welcomed the renewed connection with warmth, others kept their distance. Frank learned to accept the outcomes without bitterness, understanding that healing was a process, not a guarantee. These reconnections enriched his life beyond measure, filling the lonely spaces with laughter, companionship, and shared purpose. One afternoon, Linda surprised Frank by organizing a family picnic in the park, inviting friends and neighbors to celebrate the progress of his invention and his new outlook on life. The gathering was filled with warmth and joy, a tapestry of old and new bonds woven together. Watching the crowd, Frank marveled at how far he had come from the isolated man who once believed he had little left to offer. Throughout this emotional journey, Frank kept returning to Elon Musk's mindset, embracing vulnerability, taking risks, and refusing to be confined by past failures or societal expectations. The lessons were clear: reinvention required not just technical innovation but emotional courage. Rekindling relationships demanded patience, humility, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Frank's story became a beacon not only for seniors seeking to reclaim their purpose but also for anyone wrestling with the fear of reaching out, of mending broken ties. His journey demonstrated that no matter the years lost, the door to connection could be opened anew. One evening, as Frank and Sarah walked through the neighborhood, he shared a thought that had settled deep in his heart. "I thought I was too old to make things right," he said softly. "But maybe age just means we've had more time to learn how to be better." Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. Maybe that's the real invention. Their footsteps echoed on the pavement, a rhythm of renewal and hope. Frank knew the road ahead would have its challenges, but he was no longer walking it alone or afraid. The rekindled relationships were not just a return to the past but a foundation for a richer, more connected future, one filled with possibility, forgiveness, and love. Building momentum, the breakthrough with relationships, the growing community support, and the increasing refinement of the invention gave Frank a new surge of energy. What had started as a small spark in his garage was quickly becoming a movement that extended far beyond him. With Marjorie's expertise, Tom's business insights, and now Sarah's fresh perspective, Frank felt the project accelerating towards something greater. The nonprofit partner secured a larger grant, enabling the purchase of better materials and the hiring of a small team to assist with testing and outreach. Frank found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity, meetings with engineers, marketing strategists, and even local government officials interested in the social impact. Despite the hectic pace, Frank remained grounded by the principles Elon Musk had inspired in him: to think boldly, work tirelessly, and embrace failure as a step toward success. Each morning began with a walk to clear his mind, a practice he'd adopted to maintain both physical and mental strength. On one such walk, he met Eleanor, a retired teacher with a passion for community service. Eleanor volunteered to organize workshops and educational sessions about the invention and its potential benefits. Her involvement added a new dimension to the project, connecting it to a broader audience eager to learn and engage. As momentum built, Frank encountered new challenges, balancing the demands of leadership, managing expectations, and navigating the inevitable setbacks that accompany any innovation. There were technical failures, budget shortfalls, and moments of self-doubt. Yet with every obstacle, Frank's resolve deepened. He remembered Elon's advice about embracing failure: it's not about how many times you fail, but how you learn and adapt. That mindset helped Frank view problems as opportunities to grow rather than reasons to quit. The team grew closer, a family bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. Late nights in the workshop were filled with problem-solving and storytelling, laughter and frustration mingling in equal measure. Frank reveled in this sense of belonging, proof that no one is ever too old to create, lead, or inspire. The community around them responded in kind. Local businesses offered sponsorships, volunteers signed up to help with events, and media outlets began covering their progress with genuine interest. Frank found himself invited to speak at conferences and panels, where he emphasized the power of seniors to drive innovation and change. His message resonated deeply, breaking stereotypes and inspiring others to take bold steps in their own lives. One particularly meaningful moment came when a group of young engineering students visited the workshop. Their enthusiasm and fresh ideas invigorated the project, bridging the generation gap in a way Frank had only dreamed of. He realized the true strength of the movement was its inclusivity, bringing together people of all ages to collaborate and learn. As the prototype neared completion, Frank felt a profound sense of accomplishment. But more than that, he felt hope. Hope for himself, his family, and the countless seniors who had felt sidelined by a society obsessed with youth. The invention was more than a device, it was a symbol of possibility, a testament to the unyielding human spirit. One afternoon, as Frank and his team prepared for a major demonstration to potential investors and community leaders, he took a moment to reflect. The journey had been anything but easy, marked by pain, rejection, and self-doubt. Yet here he was, standing on the brink of something truly transformative. Elon Musk's voice echoed in his mind: some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. Frank smiled. He had embraced change, and in doing so, he had rediscovered not just a project, but a purpose. The demonstration was a success. Investors were impressed by the progress, community leaders inspired by the social impact, and the press eager to tell the story of reinvention. Frank's team received offers of partnership and funding that promised to take the invention from prototype to production. That evening, Frank sat with Marjorie, Tom, and Sarah, sharing a quiet moment of celebration. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but the momentum was undeniable. Together, they had built something powerful, proof that age was no limit to innovation, leadership, or impact. As Frank looked around the room, filled with friends, family, and allies, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey that had begun with a single choice to refuse invisibility had grown into a movement capable of changing lives. And in that truth, Frank found not just success, but meaning. The future was bright, and it was theirs to shape. The setback just as the momentum was reaching a thrilling peak, the unexpected happened. One crisp autumn morning, Frank arrived at the workshop to find a message waiting on his phone, a call from the nonprofit partner's director, delivering news that hit like a hammer. Due to budget cuts and shifting priorities, the major grant that had fueled much of their progress was being pulled. The words echoed in Frank's mind, "We're sorry, but we have to redirect funding to other projects." It was more than a financial blow, it felt like a betrayal. For months, they had relied on that support to keep the project moving, paying for materials, the small staff, and community outreach. Now, with the funds gone, everything was at risk. Panic rose quickly, threatening to undo the hard-won confidence Frank had built. The invention, the team, the relationships, all suddenly fragile. He gathered Marjorie, Tom, and Sarah in the workshop, their faces mirroring the weight of the news. Marjorie's jaw tightened, Tom paced restlessly, and Sarah looked down, biting her lip. Frank took a deep breath, remembering Elon Musk's words, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." But this was different. This felt like more than a simple failure. It was a test of everything they had built. The team spent hours brainstorming, searching for solutions to bridge the financial gap. Crowdfunding. Private investors. Cutting costs. None of the options were easy or guaranteed. The pressure mounted, fraying nerves and sparking heated debates. Frank felt the familiar ache of self-doubt creep in. Had he been naive to think age was no barrier? Had society's skepticism finally caught up to him? Late one night, exhausted and alone, Frank sat in his favorite chair and stared at the framed Elon Musk quote on the wall, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." The words sparked a flicker of resolve. He wasn't done. Not yet. The next day, Frank reached out to the community that had rallied around them from the beginning. He posted an honest message on social media and the project's blog, no sugarcoating, no dramatics, just truth. He explained the setback, shared the challenges, and made a heartfelt plea for support. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages poured in, words of encouragement, offers of help, even donations large and small. Frank realized the movement was bigger than any single funding source. Inspired by this groundswell, the team launched a crowdfunding campaign. It was daunting, especially in a world saturated with causes and appeals. But Frank's story, his age-defying determination and the community they'd built, resonated deeply. Days turned into weeks as the campaign gained traction. There were moments of doubt, lulls in momentum, and the ever-present fear of failure. Yet the support continued to grow, a testament to the power of authenticity and hope. Meanwhile, the setback forced the team to become more resourceful and efficient. Marjorie found creative ways to repurpose materials, Tom negotiated discounted services, and Sarah organized volunteer events to keep the community engaged. The adversity became a crucible, strengthening their bonds and sharpening their focus. During this difficult period, Frank also faced personal challenges. His health, while improved, was fragile. The stress and long hours took a toll, and a routine checkup revealed elevated blood pressure. The doctor's advice was clear: slow down, prioritize rest, or risk serious consequences. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Frank wrestled with the tension between pushing forward and preserving his well-being. Elon Musk's relentless drive had inspired him, but Frank also knew that sustainability was essential. He adjusted his schedule, delegating more responsibilities and building in time for self-care. The balance was delicate but necessary. Slowly, the crowdfunding campaign hit its target. The team celebrated this hard-earned victory but knew the road ahead remained challenging. The setback had exposed vulnerabilities but also revealed strengths they hadn't fully recognized. Frank reflected on the journey and realized that setbacks were not failures, they were part of the process. They tested resolve, inspired creativity, and deepened commitment. He understood now that transformation was not a straight line but a series of peaks and valleys, each with its own lessons. One evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, Frank stood outside the workshop, feeling the crisp air on his face. He thought of Elon Musk's words again and whispered, "We're not giving up." The fire that had sparked months ago still burned brightly. The setback was real, painful, but not the end. It was just another chapter in a story of resilience, hope, and relentless pursuit of purpose. And Frank was ready to write it. A new vision. The setback had forced Frank and his team to reassess everything. The loss of the major grant was more than a financial hurdle, it was a call to rethink their approach and deepen their mission. What had started as a simple invention was becoming something much bigger, a movement to redefine aging, community, and purpose. Sitting in the quiet of the workshop one early morning, Frank stared at the scattered blueprints and prototypes, feeling both the weight of their journey and the promise of what lay ahead. Elon Musk's mindset echoed in his mind: if you get up in the morning and think the future is going to be better, it is a bright day. Otherwise, it's not. Frank realized that hope was a choice, and he chose to see the future as bright. Over the next weeks, the team gathered to reimagine their goals, shifting from solely focusing on the invention to building a platform that empowered seniors in broader ways. The new vision was clear. Create not just a product but a community hub where seniors could connect, learn, innovate, and support each other. This pivot energized the team. Marjorie proposed partnering with local libraries and community centers to host workshops and makerspaces. Tom suggested creating an online platform to share stories, tutorials, and resources. Sarah brought ideas for intergenerational projects, connecting seniors with youth to exchange skills and perspectives. The idea was ambitious but rooted in their collective experience and passion. They named it the Next Chapter Project, symbolizing the power of reinvention at any age. As plans took shape, Frank noticed a transformation within himself. The project was no longer just a way to prove he could still contribute, it had become a mission to inspire and uplift others facing similar struggles. The fear and self-doubt that had once held him back gave way to a deep sense of purpose and responsibility. The community responded with enthusiasm. Seniors from nearby towns volunteered to help organize events, share their stories, and mentor others. Local schools and youth groups expressed interest in collaboration. Media outlets picked up the story of this grassroots movement challenging ageism and celebrating lifelong creativity. Frank's public talks evolved from technical presentations to heartfelt conversations about hope, resilience, and the beauty of new beginnings. One afternoon, at a workshop hosted in the town library, Frank watched as a group of seniors gathered around a table, their hands busy building simple prototypes with recycled materials. The room buzzed with energy and laughter. He saw in their faces the same spark that had reignited in his own heart months ago. Among the participants was Gloria, a 72-year-old former teacher who had felt invisible since retiring. Now, she was leading a project to design affordable gardening tools for seniors with limited mobility. Her passion and creativity inspired everyone around her. Frank realized that the real invention was this awakening, the discovery that aging didn't mean fading away but blossoming into new forms of life and impact. The Next Chapter project was becoming a beacon of possibility. With the crowdfunding funds, they invested in creating a modest but functional online hub. The website featured stories from seniors across the country, instructional videos, a forum for ideas, and resources for health, technology, and personal growth. It quickly gained traction, attracting a diverse audience eager for connection and inspiration. Frank was amazed by the flood of messages he received. From seniors sharing their own transformations to caregivers seeking advice and young people curious about what they could learn from older generations. This cross-generational dialogue was exactly what he had hoped to spark. The project also caught the attention of local policymakers interested in supporting aging populations. Frank was invited to speak at town hall meetings, advocating for increased funding and services for seniors. His voice carried the authority of experience and the fire of conviction. At home, the changes rippled through Frank's relationships. Sarah continued to grow closer, bringing her own family into the fold. Marjorie and Tom's partnership deepened, not just as colleagues but as friends and confidants. The loneliness that had once consumed him became a distant memory. One evening, after a particularly inspiring panel discussion, Frank sat with his team reflecting on their journey. "We've come so far," he said quietly, "but I think we're just getting started." They raised their cups in a toast, not just to their success but to the countless untold stories of seniors ready to rewrite their futures. Elon Musk's radical thinking had been the spark, but the flame was theirs to nurture and share. Frank felt a profound gratitude for the lessons learned, the power of resilience, the necessity of community, and the limitless potential within every stage of life. He understood now that aging was not a decline but a transformation, an ongoing evolution filled with challenges and triumphs. As the night deepened, Frank stepped outside into the cool air, looking up at the stars. The future stretched out before him, vast and inviting. He whispered a quiet promise, to keep pushing, keep dreaming, and keep lighting the way for others who might have lost hope. The new vision was more than a plan, it was a movement, a revolution of the heart and mind. And Frank was proud to be its champion. The first major win the day of the big presentation arrived faster than Frank expected. After months of tireless work, fundraising, community building, and overcoming setbacks, the next chapter project was ready to step into the spotlight. The venue was a renovated auditorium downtown, filled with seniors, community leaders, journalists, and potential investors. Frank stood backstage, his heart pounding but steady, fueled by the knowledge that this moment was more than just a pitch, it was a declaration. He was no longer the man sidelined by age or circumstance. He was a leader, a visionary, a symbol of what was possible when you refused to be defined by limitations. As he stepped into the light and faced the audience, Frank's eyes scanned the crowd, landing on familiar faces, Sarah smiling with pride, Marjorie giving an encouraging nod, Tom quietly confident. The energy in the room was electric, a tangible sense of hope and possibility. Frank began by sharing his personal story, the loneliness, the regret, the spark inspired by Elon Musk's fearless mindset. He spoke honestly about the setbacks, the doubts, and the resilience required to keep going. His voice carried the raw emotion of someone who had fought hard to reclaim purpose and dignity. Then he unveiled the next chapter project, not just as an invention, but as a movement. He highlighted the workshops, the online platform, the community collaborations, and the countless seniors rediscovering their power and creativity. He told stories of Gloria and others whose lives had been transformed. The audience was silent, rapt with attention. Frank's words resonated deeply because they were real, vulnerable, and infused with possibility. After the presentation, the floor opened to questions. Community leaders asked about expanding services, potential partnerships, and sustainability. Investors inquired about scalability and impact metrics. Frank and his team answered with confidence and clarity, showing the depth of their commitment and the strength of their model. When the event concluded, several investors approached Frank with offers of funding and support that far exceeded their immediate needs. Local officials pledged to back new initiatives aligned with the project's goals. The media buzzed with headlines praising the initiative as a groundbreaking step toward empowering seniors nationwide. The first major win was more than financial, it was validation. Frank felt the immense relief and joy of seeing months of relentless effort rewarded. But more importantly, he felt affirmed in his belief that age was not a barrier but a catalyst for innovation. That night, the team gathered at a nearby diner, their faces glowing with excitement and gratitude. They toasted to the victory but also to the journey ahead, the new challenges and opportunities that awaited. Frank reflected on how far they had come from the lonely man in the garage, battling invisibility and despair. Now, he was part of a movement reshaping the narrative around aging, proving that life's second act could be the most impactful yet. The win rekindled Frank's spirit in profound ways. He realized that success wasn't about proving others wrong but about proving to himself that he still mattered, that his dreams were valid. The project had given him a renewed sense of identity and belonging. Yet he also knew the importance of humility and persistence. This victory was a milestone, not the finish line. There would be more obstacles, more setbacks, and moments of doubt. But armed with experience, community, and unshakable resolve, Frank was ready to face whatever came next. In the weeks following the event, momentum surged. The Next Chapter project expanded its reach, adding more workshops, increasing online content, and forming partnerships with senior centers and educational institutions. Frank traveled to speak at conferences and community events, sharing his story and advocating for seniors everywhere. His message was clear: it's never too late. Your purpose is waiting for you. At home, relationships blossomed further. Sarah became an active collaborator, her presence a constant reminder of healing and second chances. Marjorie and Tom's dedication never wavered, their friendship a steady foundation. Frank found joy in the simple moments: walks with Sarah, shared meals, quiet evenings reflecting on the day's progress. One afternoon, as Frank sat in the workshop tinkering with a new prototype, he felt a deep sense of peace. The struggle, the setbacks, the fears, they all felt like necessary steps on this path. The first major win was proof that persistence pays off, that transformation is possible at any age. Elon Musk's voice echoed once more: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. Frank wasn't forced. Not yet. The fire inside him burned brighter than ever. Facing the critics, the spotlight that followed the Next Chapter project's success brought not only admiration but also skepticism and criticism. As Frank's story gained attention, voices emerged questioning the feasibility of seniors leading innovation, doubting the impact of the project, and sometimes dismissing the idea altogether. The backlash was subtle at first: comments on social media questioning if someone of his age could truly drive change, articles downplaying the importance of senior-led initiatives, even a few well-meaning but condescending remarks from acquaintances. Frank felt the sting, a familiar ache that echoed the loneliness and invisibility he had fought so hard to escape. It was tempting to retreat, to shrink back into the shadows where doubt couldn't reach. But he remembered Elon Musk's relentless defiance of convention, the refusal to let naysayers dictate his path. When Henry Ford made cheap, reliable cars, people said, "Nah, what's wrong with a horse?" Elon's words rang in Frank's mind. Ignore the doubters. Frank shared the criticism openly with his team. Marjorie, ever pragmatic, reminded him that pushing boundaries always invited resistance. Tom encouraged Frank to use the critiques as fuel rather than fear. Sarah's fresh perspective helped Frank see that skepticism was often rooted in fear of change, and that their work was precisely about changing minds. Together, they decided to face the critics head-on. Frank started hosting live Q&A sessions online, inviting critics to engage directly. He welcomed tough questions and honest dialogue, answering with transparency, passion, and facts. His authenticity disarmed many skeptics and inspired supporters. One memorable session featured a panel of seniors, innovators, and young advocates, bridging the generational divide and showcasing diverse perspectives. The dialogue was respectful but candid, breaking down stereotypes and building understanding. Frank also leaned into media opportunities, writing op-eds and giving interviews where he emphasized the untapped potential of seniors and the importance of redefining aging. His message was clear: dismissing seniors is a loss for society, a failure to recognize decades of experience, wisdom, and creativity. The team expanded outreach efforts, partnering with advocacy groups and educational institutions to promote inclusivity and respect for older adults. These collaborations brought new allies and amplified their voice. Meanwhile, Frank continued his own personal growth. He practiced mindfulness and resilience-building techniques to handle criticism without letting it erode his confidence. He surrounded himself with supportive friends and family, drawing strength from their belief in the mission. Through it all, Frank's conviction deepened. He knew that real change required challenging deeply ingrained beliefs, and that discomfort was part of the process. The critics were not enemies but markers of the old mindset slowly being dismantled. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging day of harsh online comments and media scrutiny, Frank took a solitary walk in the park. The crisp air and golden leaves offered a moment of calm. He thought about Elon Musk's willingness to take risks and face controversy in pursuit of his vision. "You have to be willing to be misunderstood," Elon had said. Frank accepted that misunderstanding and criticism would come, but they wouldn't define him or his work. Instead, he chose to let them sharpen his resolve. Back at the workshop, Frank found renewed energy. He and his team refined their messaging, focusing on stories of impact and empowerment. They highlighted testimonials from seniors whose lives had been transformed by the project, putting faces and voices to the movement. The critics didn't disappear, but their voices became part of a larger, more powerful chorus of support. Frank realized that the battle wasn't just about a project or a prototype, it was about reclaiming dignity, respect, and opportunity for an entire generation. The experience also taught Frank a vital lesson: courage is not the absence of fear or doubt but the willingness to act despite them. He had come a long way from the man who once questioned if anyone cared or if it was too late. Now, he stood firm, a living testament to the power of persistence, vision, and heart. The critics had challenged him, but they had not defeated him. Instead, they had helped forge a stronger, more resilient leader ready to continue the fight. As Frank prepared for a national conference where he would speak on senior innovation and leadership, he felt the familiar mix of nerves and excitement. The journey had been hard, but every step had brought him closer to the person, and the purpose, he was meant to be. In that moment, Frank knew he was no longer alone or invisible. He was part of a movement, a legacy of change and hope that would outlast any criticism. And that made all the difference. The breakthrough. After weathering the storm of criticism and doubt, Frank and his team felt the unmistakable shift, the breakthrough they had been working toward. It wasn't just a moment of external validation but a deep, internal confirmation that their vision was gaining traction and their efforts were making a tangible difference. The breakthrough began quietly. A technology company, impressed by the grassroots movement and the innovative spirit of the Next Chapter project, reached out with a proposal to collaborate. They offered resources, expertise, and access to advanced tools that could accelerate the development of Frank's designs and expand the project's reach. It was the kind of opportunity that seemed too good to be true, but the team approached it with cautious optimism. Frank recalled Elon Musk's belief in taking the risks that seem crazy but are necessary to achieve something truly extraordinary. This felt like one of those risks. The collaboration meant adapting to new processes, learning cutting-edge technology, and navigating corporate dynamics, challenges that stretched the team beyond their comfort zones. Yet, each obstacle became a chance to grow. Marjorie spearheaded integration efforts, ensuring the partnership honored the project's grassroots spirit. Tom coordinated logistics, while Sarah managed community relations, balancing innovation with accessibility. Frank himself dove into learning about new engineering tools, determined not to be left behind by his age or experience. The partnership quickly bore fruit. New prototypes emerged that were lighter, more efficient, and user-friendly, reflecting the input of seniors who tested and refined the designs. The online platform evolved into an interactive hub, featuring live workshops, virtual maker spaces, and a vibrant forum buzzing with creativity and support. More importantly, the community expanded exponentially. Seniors across the country joined the movement, sharing their own projects, stories, and dreams. The Next Chapter project had grown from a local initiative into a national phenomenon. Proof that age was no barrier to impact. With this momentum, Frank found himself invited to speak on national stages, featured in major publications, and consulted by policymakers shaping the future of aging services. His message was clear and powerful: the old narratives about aging are lies designed to limit us. The truth is that every day is an opportunity to start anew, to innovate, to connect, and to contribute. One evening, after a day packed with meetings and interviews, Frank sat alone in the workshop. He looked around at the tools, the prototypes, the notes scribbled on whiteboards, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was more than a project, it was a movement reshaping how society viewed aging and capability. He thought back to the lonely man who had doubted his worth, feeling forgotten and irrelevant. The journey had been arduous, marked by setbacks, fears, and moments of despair. But through it all, Frank had learned the truth Elon Musk so often lived, that greatness demands relentless courage and the willingness to defy expectations. The breakthrough wasn't a destination but a process, an ongoing evolution fueled by passion, community, and resilience. Frank realized that the breakthrough had also changed him personally. He was no longer defined by age or limitations but by purpose and possibility. His health had stabilized, his relationships deepened, his spirit soared. The next chapter project was his legacy, but also a gift to himself and countless others. As Frank prepared for the next phase, scaling the project nationally and mentoring others to start their own second acts, he felt a renewed commitment. The breakthrough was just the beginning. With unwavering faith in the future, Frank knew they could continue to defy the lies about aging and inspire seniors everywhere to reclaim their power. The fire that Elon Musk's mindset had ignited in him burned brighter than ever, lighting the way forward. New horizons. The breakthrough had opened doors Frank hadn't dared to imagine just months before. Suddenly, the horizon stretched wide and filled with possibilities, each one beckoning with the promise of growth and transformation. The next chapter project was no longer just a local endeavor, it had become a nationwide movement inspiring seniors to innovate, create, and lead with newfound purpose. With the support of their new partners and growing community, Frank and his team began planning ambitious expansions. They envisioned satellite workshops in cities across the country, an ever-evolving online platform connecting thousands, and programs fostering intergenerational collaboration. The excitement was palpable, but so was the weight of responsibility. Every step forward carried the hopes of countless seniors who had been waiting for a sign that they still mattered, that their dreams were worth chasing. One crisp autumn morning, Frank found himself on a plane headed to Seattle, where he was invited to speak at a major conference on aging and technology. The invitation was a milestone, a recognition of the impact their project had made and the growing demand for senior-driven innovation. As the plane soared above the clouds, Frank reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the quiet despair of his early days, to the spark ignited by Elon Musk's radical mindset, to the challenges and triumphs of building the next chapter project, every moment had shaped this new horizon. Upon arrival, the energy of the conference was electric. Thought leaders, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and activists gathered to discuss the future of aging in America. Frank's session was one of the most anticipated. When he stepped onto the stage, the audience greeted him with a warm, enthusiastic applause. He began by sharing his personal story, the loneliness, the doubts, and the unexpected spark of hope that transformed his life. His voice was steady and passionate, weaving together the themes of resilience, purpose, and the power of community. Frank emphasized the importance of rejecting society's limiting narratives about aging and embracing a mindset of radical possibility. The crowd listened intently, many nodding in agreement, some wiping away tears. After his talk, Frank was approached by numerous attendees eager to learn more, collaborate, or share their own stories. A young tech entrepreneur expressed interest in developing user-friendly apps tailored to seniors. A retired nurse shared ideas for wellness programs integrated with creative projects. A city official invited Frank to help design inclusive senior centers focused on innovation and engagement. These connections fueled Frank's optimism. He realized that the movement he helped spark was gaining momentum beyond anything he had imagined. But even as new horizons beckoned, Frank remained grounded. He understood that transformation was not just about growth or recognition, it was about meaningful impact in the lives of individuals. Back home, the team worked tirelessly to build on their success, launching pilot programs in several cities and expanding online offerings. Seniors shared stories of renewed confidence, friendships, and unexpected achievements. Gloria's gardening tool project evolved into a small business employing other seniors. Workshops were filled with laughter, creativity, and purpose. The impact was tangible and deeply fulfilling. One afternoon, Frank received a letter from a woman named Diane, a 68-year-old widow living in rural Iowa. She wrote about feeling invisible and forgotten until she discovered the Next Chapter project online. Through the workshops, she learned to build simple devices to help with her arthritis and began mentoring others in her community. Diane's words were a testament to the ripple effect of their work, a reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite profound change. Frank shared Diane's letter with the team, inspiring them to push harder, dream bigger, and keep reaching those who felt left behind. Yet, the journey was not without challenges. Expanding nationally meant navigating complex logistics, funding hurdles, and ensuring the project stayed true to its grassroots origins. Frank and his team grappled with balancing growth and authenticity, always mindful of the voices and needs of the seniors they served. During a team retreat in a quiet lakeside cabin, Frank led a conversation about the future. "We've come so far," he said, "but our mission is just beginning. We must remember why we started, because too many seniors feel forgotten. Our work is to show them that their story isn't over. The next chapter is theirs to write." The team nodded, renewed in their commitment. As autumn deepened and the leaves turned vibrant shades of red and gold, Frank felt a deep gratitude for the journey and excitement for what lay ahead. The horizon was wide and filled with promise, a testament to the power of hope, courage, and community. Elon Musk's words echoed in his mind, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." For Frank and the Next Chapter project, the odds were long, but the mission was too vital to quit. New horizons awaited, and Frank was ready to lead the way. The power of connection. As the Next Chapter project expanded, Frank came to realize that the true heartbeat of their movement was not just innovation or technology, but connection. In a world that often isolated seniors behind stereotypes and physical barriers, the project was weaving a vibrant web of relationships, between seniors, families, communities, and generations. Frank had seen firsthand how loneliness and invisibility weighed heavily on the souls of many older adults. The statistics were stark: millions of seniors facing social isolation, with devastating effects on mental and physical health. Yet, through the workshops, online forums, and community events, something powerful was happening: a rekindling of bonds, a rediscovery of purpose through shared experiences. One afternoon, Frank sat in the bustling workshop space, watching a group of seniors gathered around a table, collaborating on a project. The air was filled with laughter, animated conversations, and the satisfying sound of tools and keyboards. Gloria was teaching a few newcomers how to use a 3D printer to create assistive devices, while Diane shared stories of her small-town group that had started a community garden inspired by the project. Frank felt a profound sense of joy and fulfillment. These connections were more than social, they were lifelines, sources of strength and renewal. The online platform had become a digital town square, where seniors from diverse backgrounds exchanged ideas, encouragement, and friendship. Frank read messages from participants who felt seen and valued for the first time in years. The project was breaking down the isolation that aging often imposed, replacing it with a network of support and possibility. Frank also noticed the impact on families. Many adult children who had once worried about their aging parents now saw them flourishing, energized by creativity and community. Reconciliation and renewed communication blossomed in homes touched by the project's influence. Sarah's relationship with her own mother improved as they collaborated on a joint art project through the platform. The power of connection extended beyond seniors to the younger generations eager to learn from their wisdom and experience. Intergenerational workshops brought teens and seniors together, sharing skills from coding to quilting, building mutual respect and understanding. Frank believed this bridging of generations was vital to dismantling ageism and building a more compassionate society. Yet, the work of nurturing connection was ongoing and delicate. Frank and his team devoted time to fostering safe, inclusive environments where every voice was heard. They trained facilitators in empathy and active listening, recognizing that trust and belonging were foundational to transformation. One particularly moving moment came during a national conference when Frank met Robert, a Vietnam veteran who had been estranged from his family for years. Through the project, Robert found a community that welcomed him without judgment and helped him reconnect with his daughter. Their reunion was tearful and profound, a testament to the healing power of belonging. Frank understood that these personal victories, though quieter than headlines or funding milestones, were the true measure of success. They embodied the essence of the Next Chapter project, that every person, regardless of age or circumstance, deserves to feel connected, valued, and hopeful. As the movement grew, Frank began to mentor other senior leaders, sharing insights on building authentic community and sustaining connection in an increasingly digital world. He emphasized that technology was a tool, not a substitute for genuine human relationships. His own experience had shown him that even in the face of physical limitations or loss, connection could spark joy and resilience. Late one evening, Frank received a heartfelt message from a participant named Linda, who shared how the project helped her overcome grief after losing her spouse. "For the first time in years, I feel alive again," she wrote. "I have friends, purpose, and hope." Frank replied with encouragement, grateful for the reminder that their work was changing lives in the most profound ways. Reflecting on the journey, Frank realized that connection was the ultimate catalyst for transformation. It was the invisible thread weaving together hope, courage, and purpose. Without it, innovation would be hollow; with it, even the smallest step could become a giant leap. As he prepared for a new phase of the Next Chapter project focused on expanding support networks and deepening community ties, Frank felt a renewed sense of mission. Elon Musk's rebellious spirit had sparked his journey, but it was the power of human connection that had sustained it. The project was no longer just about proving what seniors could do, it was about creating a world where every older adult felt seen, heard, and empowered to write their next chapter. Frank looked around the workshop, his heart full. The laughter, the collaboration, the shared dreams, they were living proof that age was not a barrier but a bridge. The power of connection was real, and it was changing everything. The final test. Just as the Next Chapter project seemed to be reaching a new peak, Frank faced a challenge that threatened to unravel everything. The project had become a beacon of hope for seniors across the country, but success also brought scrutiny from unexpected quarters. A sudden funding shortfall, coupled with bureaucratic obstacles, jeopardized the expansion plans and cast doubt on the sustainability of the entire movement. The news hit Frank like a punch to the gut. Months of hard work, late nights, and relentless effort now seemed fragile, hanging by a thread. The pressure was immense, not just from external forces but from within himself. Doubts crept back, whispering the same old fears: was it really possible to change the way society viewed aging? Could they survive this setback? Was Frank, at his age, capable of steering the movement through this storm? The weight of responsibility felt crushing, but Frank drew strength from the very community he had helped build. The seniors who had found purpose and connection through the project rallied around him, sharing messages of support and determination. Their resilience reminded Frank that the movement was bigger than any one person or obstacle. He called an emergency meeting with his core team. The mood was tense but hopeful. Marjorie laid out the financial realities with clear-eyed honesty. Tom brainstormed creative fundraising ideas, while Sarah explored new partnerships and grant opportunities. Frank encouraged them all to remember their mission and the lives at stake. Drawing on Elon Musk's mindset, Frank reminded the team that every breakthrough required confronting failure head-on. "It's not about avoiding the storm," he said, "but learning to dance in the rain." Together, they crafted a bold plan to navigate the crisis. They launched a nationwide crowdfunding campaign, appealing directly to the seniors, families, and supporters whose lives had been touched. The campaign featured compelling stories, like Diane's journey from isolation to empowerment, and Robert's reunion with his daughter, showcasing the human impact of the project. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from unexpected places, small-town communities, former skeptics, even young people inspired by the seniors' determination. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #NextChapterStrong and #SeniorsLeadChange, creating a wave of momentum that transcended geography and age. Frank personally reached out to influential figures in the tech and aging advocacy worlds, securing endorsements and additional support. His authenticity and passion resonated, opening doors that had previously seemed closed. Despite the surge in support, the path forward was not without setbacks. A key partner withdrew, citing shifting priorities. A crucial grant application was denied. Frank faced moments of exhaustion and frustration but refused to let them define the journey. Instead, he focused on the incremental victories, the heartfelt thank you notes, the new volunteers stepping up, the seniors' creativity shining brighter than ever. The crisis became a crucible, forging stronger bonds within the team and community. Frank saw his role evolve from innovator to leader, mentor, and guardian of a vision larger than himself. Late one night, after a long day of strategizing and outreach, Frank sat alone in the workshop. He reflected on how far they had come, from a lonely man doubting his worth to a movement inspiring thousands. The moment was bittersweet, filled with uncertainty but also unshakable hope. He thought about Elon Musk's words, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." That night, Frank renewed his vow never to give up. The final test was not just about funding or logistics, it was about spirit, determination, and the refusal to let age define one's destiny. Weeks later, the team gathered to announce the successful funding of the next phase, a testament to collective will and unwavering belief. The victory was not just financial but deeply symbolic, a reaffirmation that seniors could lead, innovate, and inspire against all odds. Frank stood before the crowd, his voice steady and filled with gratitude. "We faced our toughest challenge and emerged stronger because we chose hope over fear, connection over isolation, and action over resignation. This is only the beginning." As applause filled the room, Frank felt a profound sense of peace. The final test had arrived, and he had passed, not alone but alongside a community united by courage and purpose. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but the foundation was unshakable. Age was no longer a barrier but a bridge to new possibilities. The Next Chapter project was proof that the human spirit, when ignited, could rewrite any story. The new legacy. Frank stood in the quiet of the workshop, sunlight filtering through the windows and casting long shadows across the tables cluttered with tools, prototypes, and notes. It was a space that had transformed alongside him, a symbol of his journey from doubt and isolation to purpose and connection. He ran his hand over the smooth surface of a wooden bench, once rough and unused, now a cradle for creativity and collaboration. Around him were photographs pinned to the walls, smiling faces of seniors who had found new meaning through the Next Chapter project, snapshots of moments shared in workshops, celebrations of small victories, and letters of gratitude that told stories of lives reclaimed. Frank's thoughts wandered back to the beginning, to the man who once believed his best days were behind him, who feared he was invisible and irrelevant. That man was still there, but changed. He had become a living testament to the truth Elon Musk embodied, that age is not a cage but a canvas. "I was never too old," Frank murmured to himself, "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." Over the years, Frank had learned that legacy was not about monuments or money, it was about impact, the ripples one creates in the lives of others. The Next Chapter project had become his legacy, but it was also a living, breathing movement, carried forward by thousands of seniors who refused to be defined by society's limitations. As Frank prepared for a national tour to share the story and ignite other communities, he reflected on the lessons learned. He thought of Gloria, whose gardening tools business had flourished, Diane, who brought her newfound skills back to her rural town, Robert, reunited with his family and thriving, and countless others whose lives had been touched and transformed. Each story was a thread in the rich tapestry of the Next Chapter project, a tapestry woven with courage, resilience, and hope. Frank knew that the true power of the movement was its ability to inspire action. It wasn't enough to feel hopeful. Seniors needed to be empowered to take bold steps, to innovate, to connect. He had witnessed firsthand how a small choice, a daily walk, a blog post, a message reaching out, could ignite a fire that changed everything. The new legacy was about cultivating that fire in every senior who felt lost or forgotten. Frank remembered the skepticism he once faced, from doctors telling him to slow down, from family members doubting his dreams, from a society that underestimated older adults. But those doubts had fueled his resolve rather than extinguished it. He had learned to harness fear and criticism as catalysts for growth, inspired by Elon Musk's relentless defiance of limits and norms. "The future belongs to those who dare to imagine it," Frank often quoted. And indeed, the seniors who had joined the movement dared to dream, dared to create, dared to rewrite their stories. As the sun dipped lower, Frank sat down to write the foreword for the upcoming book chronicling the Next Chapter project. He wanted to speak directly to seniors who might be hesitating, unsure if they still had something to offer. "If you're reading this," he wrote, "know that your story is not finished. The world still needs your wisdom, your creativity, and your courage. Don't let anyone tell you it's too late. Your next chapter is waiting to be written." The project had grown beyond Frank's initial vision, touching communities, influencing policies, and shifting cultural perceptions about aging. But Frank understood that the journey was ongoing. He vowed to continue listening, learning, and adapting, because every generation of seniors brought new challenges and new opportunities. The new legacy was also about building structures that could sustain change long after he was gone. Mentorship programs, leadership training, and partnerships with younger generations ensured that the movement remained dynamic and inclusive. Frank smiled as he recalled the intergenerational workshops where teens learned from seniors, and seniors learned new technologies from youth, a beautiful exchange breaking down barriers and fostering mutual respect. Standing in the workshop one last time before the tour, Frank felt a profound peace. The journey that had once seemed impossible had unfolded into a vibrant reality. The lies about aging, that it meant decline, invisibility, and the end, had been shattered by a movement of seniors reclaiming their power. Frank's voice, once quiet and uncertain, now carried the weight of experience and hope. "This isn't the end," he told the gathered team. "It's the beginning of a new era where seniors lead, innovate, and inspire. Our legacy is not what we leave behind, but what we create today." The room filled with applause, a chorus of determination and belief. As Frank looked around at the faces glowing with purpose, he knew the true legacy of the Next Chapter project was not his alone, it belonged to everyone who dared to believe in the power of transformation at any age. In that moment, Frank realized he had found something more precious than success or recognition. He had found belonging, meaning, and a life renewed. The future was wide open, and the next chapter awaited, bright, bold, and unwritten. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?